So my name is Kulapat, architect, born in Thailand, in Bangkok, and then went to study in Japan, where I met Kevin there at Tokyo University. So I have my master and PhD from Tokyo University. And then after that, I worked closely with Ando, who's my mentor for around 8 years in Osaka. But I was responsible for the project outside Japan, all over in Europe, in Asia, in America. So I was doing a lot of traveling. So after that, I decided to start my own practice. So I moved to America in Los Angeles and started the firm in 2004. And then in 2010, we opened an office in New York. So right now we operate between the two offices, and we tend to work, specialize in project for the arts, museums, galleries, and art-related facilities. And we are also expanding. We do, just like homes and commercial projects as well. And recently, my interest has been, and that's why, I learned a lot from Bandit and his friend as well, because I'm very interested in housing, especially senior housing, and the subject relating to aging and inclusivity, and how do we plan something more holistic for a larger solution. So that's who I am. All right. It's interesting because I thought about that. And of course, when you think about boundary, you think about a line, right? That's how you learn, even before you think about that in terms of architecture. But in my case, because maybe the reason why I love Japanese culture and other things too, is the idea of the ambiguity, the overlapping of boundary, which in a way, Kevin suggests in his reading of Frank Lloyd Wright, right? The idea that and I've been reading one of my favorite books on thoughts in general is Simone de Beauvoir, a book called The Ethics of Ambiguity, of talking about, in a way, you might want to think that we either, what Sartre was using, which is facticity or transcendence, or being or becoming, between what you are and what you want to be. But when you look at that, identity or boundary is never it's never black or white, in a way that, and in a way, Buddha says that identity is always a response. Oh. Right? Like, who are you? You can say, I am a son, I am an architect, I am Thai, I am boring. All of these is a response to a given context of the question. So the same way that, Simone de Beauvoir was saying that there's no such thing as polar. There's no two things, because when you look deeply, you're at a 360 fulcrum of identities. So it's not even about being or becoming. It's all of these. Are you Thai? Are you Japanese? Are you architect? Are you labor? So within that, I see the ambiguity as the interesting aspect of boundary. I love that notion, and that's one of the fascination I had, and I felt that that's, part of why I find Japanese culture very interesting to me, because of that ambiguity. So in architecture, when I think about boundary, I tend to think about the in-between, which is in a way, common, right? Because I don't believe in a wall that defines the line between A and B. Okay. I like that kind of blur ambiguity between the two, which has to do with the idea that the line never exists. Okay. Right. I think, the other book that was kind of completely important to me when I was young was a book called Siam Mapped.
Oh, by Kun Thong Chai. Yeah.
Exactly. Which talked about the fact that geography doesn't have a line. Right? There's never a boundary line between Thai and Vietnam, or Thai and Laos, or Thai and Burma. At the time, people were coming and going, depending animals and people and all of that. So therefore, the line was drawn by human, And in this case, interestingly, it's drawn by the colonizers. Like the native countries do not even know have a line, and they were happy, right? So within that note, I think architecture is in the business of having to draw the line.
Yeah.
Right. We draw the line to define, to direct activities, experience, and things like that. But I'm more interested in architecture that do not need to use a line to define experience or to direct experience. And you can do it with many other things. You can do it with roof, you can do it with atmospheric elements, you can do it with many other things. And as you can see and appreciate in Japanese architecture, there's a lot of that, in Asian things in general, or even in Thai architecture. You know, I think we think about flexibility, we think about modular and how things come together. There's a lot of this gray area in betweenness that in a way support this thinking about ambiguity that I'm interested in. My first museum, right, which is the Grand Rapids Art Museum, which opened 2007. You know, I like the idea of the porch, which is in the American vernacular concept, or the idea of engawa, or the idea of sala in Thai, right? Because when I think about places I want to be, I want those places because it's either indoor, or it's either outdoor, it's either private, or it's either public. It's this kind of funny in between, which I feel everyone love. Like everyone love to hang out on stoops, right? Everyone love to hang out on porches because you're part of your house, but you're also outdoor. You're also seeing people, but you are tucked in. You feel secure. I think as animals, we do have that kind of feeling. You know, like when you watch your dog or my dog, right? They always like to be at the edge of the balcony, right? Safe within, but look out. So that is psychologically, I think, intrinsic within all of us. We like to be safe and secure, but we want to be able to look out, enjoy, you know, communities and the world around it. So in the Grand Rapids Art Museum, I think one big part was that I built a big porch in front of the museum, which is, you know, it's a cold climate. It's in Michigan. So, but it has a cover. It's a mild, cold winter. So people can use it almost all year round. And in the front of the museum, there's a park sculpture designed by Maya Lin, which is designed before the museum, but in conjunction with the museum location. So I like the idea that even in a cold climate, you know, not, maybe it's like just Japan cold, not like, you know, Alaska cold. So it still allows this indoor-outdoor to happen. I'm very much into, you know, maybe learning from Japan and Thailand, the love of nature, and how could I really always use nature as an element. So for that museum, it was a part of it. And even in the winter, people would love to use that for skating, for music, and all of the things. So it proved that the in-between, you know, both in terms of indoor, outdoor, and public and private could work in all kind of weather as well.
Yeah.
That you know, like if there's a project that I need to decorate a diagram or put together an interesting form, I find myself having difficulty, to be honest. There are architects that are good at that. They can cut the corner, they can twist it, they can do all of it, you know, maybe fine gary or something like that, that deal with architecture in its full objectness. Right? For me, I'm maybe less interested than that, even though I was trained with Ando, who a lot of people think as the box guy, right? He does minimal concrete boxes, but I never see the box. I always see the space. I see the light, I see the experience, the quality. So the box was not part of what I wanted to do. And so, you know, when I design, I tend to try to kind of create a sense of, you know, maybe which is part of also why I'm drawn to California, to LA, and maybe Hawaii also, or in Thailand. The idea that you have a large over projecting eaves and roof, that once you have the roof, right, everything under is kind of in the shadow and blending and easy, so that you don't have like a severe outdoor and a wall and an indoor. That's kind of not the vocabulary that I'm interested in. And so I like the idea of the outdoor and the big roof and the area under kind of an engawa or eave, and then slowly turn into indoor. I like that slowly graying of space. I don't like the black and white separation. And so my work tend to talk about that, or at least I feel comfortable doing it, and I feel like my interests stay there. So I always try to do that. So when I have to design something that doesn't have a roof, or something that allows me to kind of create this kind of blur, I find myself in beauty pageant all the time. I feel like, why am I trying to address this box as a sexy box, right? But when I have a roof, it feels like, oh, this is interesting. I can create this kind of blurring indoor outdoor. So I always try to kind of position the problem in that sense, that it's all about placemaking. So within that notion, the outdoor space is so important to me, and that's why, you know, as why we integrate the landscape design as architecture, you know, because I cannot just put a wall and say my work stops at the wall and you can start gardening outside. You know, for me it doesn't work that way, because the architecture doesn't have that boundary. Yeah. I really feel like we have done a lot of damage to an environment when we really practice architecture as a self-referential system, right? Which is at the core of the spirit of modern architecture. Things have to refer to its own origin, to its own process. It cannot point to other things. Right. But when you look at Lodja, when you look at many other things, people point back to nature and like, learn from that, right? I think, but so the modern architecture movement will fall in love with ourselves, with the clarity of our ideas. This is all about us. So which I felt that was good, just like an abstract painting, but at the end of the day, we're in the service of a larger thing more than just our own self-reference system. Right. So I really like that notion. And even, you know, when I come across work, and both Ando and even Richard Serra, who's, you know, another mentor or guru that I work with, they're all fascinated by Japanese gardens, right? I think even though their work is completely severe and very object-oriented, shall we say, it's the quality of spaces that they are interested in. So on that note, I kind of agree that because even Richard Serra's work, it seems like it's the only thing he does is putting heavy steels onto some kind of thing. But 100% is about context. Out of context, it's almost impossible to actually understand why such a thing exists, right? It's like, you know, if you have a poem, that poem can only be understood in the right context. It doesn't float and be self-sustained by its own. It needs to be a given to a thing. So within the, I'm absolutely fascinated with that, and I feel that the power of architecture to actually enable flourish is what I'm very interested in. You know, I'd like to be the enabler rather than the finder or the director. I like to be able to push something and and see something surprisingly happen outside of my own thinking. Yeah. I like that surprise. Whereas some people, architects, do not like surprises. They would like, you know, and maybe one of them, they like to be able to define and dictate what life will be, or how people will use the house, right? Because I mean, and Kevin would know a lot about this, but because at the time people were looking at architect as a tastemaker, right? I mean, we design a house, we design the furniture, we even design the dresses that the hostess would have to wear when she entertains within her home. It's a whole vignette of life that have good taste, and people are looking for architects to provide that taste. I think it has moved a little bit. Now we can still do some of that because we obviously have more experience and understand more, but it's more collaboration of how you actually also allow people's life to be celebrated and expanded, you know, with the skills. And I do that in museums when I work on museums. again, like what I always felt like I'm a matchmaker. So that I'm a matchmaker between art and people. So if I have a friend who's an artist, and if I have a friend who's an art lover, I want them to meet on their own terms, and then I kind of disappear in the background. I don't want to be there, breathing down their neck, making sure they have a good time, which is not, what I do as an architect. I like to kind of set the setting and kind of disappear, just like what Kevin mentioned, and then let things happen. And once you're confident that, there's some quality in the spaces you make that make people feel good, feel comfortable, and feel elevated, then they'll make their own babies. And Kevin, you know a lot about this, right? Even the Zen culture, right? The tea culture and the Zen culture was not that rigid. Right. But once you become an organized religion, once you become organized, it becomes very dictatorial. Like you have to turn the bowl this way, you have to sit this way. But when they were doing this as a living art form, right. It was a playful improvisation gesture. But you have to know enough of the rule, like what you set up early on. But after you do, you can do whatever you want. So that's kind of a good metaphor of what architecture should do. Now it becomes such a doctrine that, like when you go to ceremony now, I feel like I'm lifeless because you're being told, like, this is how you have to turn the bowl, this is how everything was dictated to the point that you're no longer having your own thinking. Yeah. Well, one thing I have to say that is really such a wonderful thing for our practice is two of our main workshops are architecture and landscape, right? And I always fascinated with that because we seem to be working together, but the mind frame is so different, right? Like the first day of architecture when the building opened is normally the time when the building is most beautiful. But the people that work on landscape and gardens, the first day that the garden opened is the ugliest of the day. And they have to work with, design elements that they cannot control. Right? Things are growing in a different way, but you have to project time dimension into your design. Whereas architecture, maybe sometimes we think about weathering and how things patina, but it's kind of the opposite. And I think that architects can learn actually a lot from gardener, from people that have to choreograph life, right? Yeah. Whereas, in a way, our job is to choreograph live as well.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Move out when we finished the building, and a lot of time we didn't have the opportunity to continue to be involved with the project as much as we finished the building, right? But for a garden, you can see it mature over times, and the more time, the better, and how it's and then it becomes control. So it's that going back to what we talked. I think that's very similar. Yeah. I really want to advocate boundary as the edge, right? What you said, like the crust, right? I think we all love the edge as we talked about, right? Because edge is where you can be experimental. Edge is where a lot of the flavors are. Edge is where you are in between what you are and what you are not, right? So all of these are interesting features. And, especially in this time, I ask myself a lot, and to be honest, part of the reason why I moved from Japan to America is because I felt that I was living in a very dictated, monotone place. I mean, I'm not just talking about architecture, but architecture too. It seems like there's only one game in town. Everyone's consuming the same information, the same media. They think the same way, and they try to be better than other in a competitive mode. But it's not a real diversity. I think in the sense that you don't have, of course, but that diversity is complex, and I think people are not interested in really dealing with complexity in a deep way, because I mean I work in, shall we say, minimalist language also, and it's very easy for minimalists to be received in social media. You have a beautiful image of a wall with a little sculpture and a light shine on it, and everyone's just like, oh my God, that's poetic, right? Anyone can do that all day long, to be honest. And I think it become a little bit of a poverty porn in some sense, right? Because of that, because it's not from Zen cultures and things. but I was kind of wondering why people are drawn to that. It's because in that sense, beauty directly related to understandability. You understand that wall, you understand that moment. Yeah. But the beauty that are more complex, you know, like not like a introduced garden. Like people love garden at Versailles because it's easy to understand. You have the enfilade, you have the axes. It's grand, it is easy to understand. It's the determination is so clear, right? And people love that aspect, even though when you think about how many people slave to make that look at it is no plants allowed to live in the way that should be. Everything is sculpted 24/7, right? Life is being captured and bounded literally for that. And you look at something that's maybe softer, like an English garden or like a Japanese garden, you know, they're still very controlled. You know, human control is everywhere, but at least it's not trying to dictate it in that way. And I feel that we need to, which, you know, I mean, Simone de Beauvoir mentioned that in her book, in some way, The Ethics of Ambiguity too, is that, you know, when you look at it, we should not be thinking about identity. We should maybe think about ambiguity, because there's no such thing as your identity and my identity. And as we see, the identity and the clarity of identity has caused more harm than good. Yeah. Right. So how do we deal with ambiguity as it's in between? And so in terms of design, I'm interested with this notion, maybe even starting from programming. How can we overlap between public and private, right? Commercial and culture, you know, kind of indoor and outdoor. We start to define the program for the architecture that way. Right. You know, so the bubble diagram, the bubbles are now overlapped and bursting, right, rather than the bubble is just isolated and you put walls around it. And it's become a very painful thing to see, because when you see young designers working, basically, if you have a diagram, this diagram starts to become a plan. Yeah. Right? And the plan starts having walls around them. So that process is so kind of automatic to the point that, and then you decorate the facade, right? So that is kind of not a placemaking, right? So I think if we can kind of disrupt that person early on, that, yeah, well, the bubbles or the diagrams, it's not even, it's blurred. In Japanese architecture, right, sometimes people refer to it as framing. Yeah, yeah. Right? I think whether it's a framing like in the shake, yeah, oral scenery aspect, or something that, in a way, you enhance nature by allowing by giving it a platform, right, of framing device, allow it even you know, not only that it look more beautiful, it become yours, because you capture that right in a shake kind of moment, which I felt is such a beautiful thing. That, you know, the idea of course, boundary lead to identity and ownership, right? Yeah. Within this, I own. Within that, you don't. So yeah, I'm not comfortable with that notion, in a sense, like how much do we have to own, yeah, to actually be happy and be beautiful, right? So I like the idea that that's why the ambiguity is interesting to me, because it's not about owning or kind of binding certain things within your own property, right, but allow things to move on. And I think, in a way, I think the Japanese maybe learned that through scarcity of materials, right, of resources, comparing to others. So from the beginning, they need to share between communities. You know, we talk about for example, like the Sento culture, right? When people are not allowed to have bath at home, people have public bath. They started a culture that come out of necessity. Yeah. And I do feel that most of the great things in life in general, you know, necessity is really the mother of invention. Sure. Yeah, yeah. And within that note, I think boundary in ideas is, if you define how you start thinking about certain things, it could lead to something unique. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, so I felt that maybe if I can define the boundary, it's more like, how do you frame your search, or how you frame your question, right? in a more interesting way that allows solutions to be unique.
Right.
Whereas, in a way, one of the most boring questions I get asked all the time is like, oh, if there's no budget, oh, if there's no site, if there's no limitation at all on your architectural thinking, what would you do, right? And my answer always like, there's no such thing. You cannot cook. You cannot cook perfection out of nothing.
Yeah.
I think, even for cooking, are you by the ocean? Are you by the mountain? Who's eating it? What kind of, it's just like the idea, and people still believe that in architecture, that there's an idealism in architecture that always being compromised by site and clients and budgets and things. Yeah. So the underlying thought is like, if no such thing exists, architecture can be released into its own full potential.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing. Like what you say, a child released out of their parent doesn't mean that the child will live its full potential. A child only arrives full potential through its parents, its context, right? So I think there's such a damaging misunderstanding of what architecture could do, because people see that creativity is being hindered by limitations. I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, as an artist, let's say as a painter, Picasso has philosophy, but he doesn't sell that for a living. He sells, digested philosophy through his skills. So I think we do have that, but you cannot sell that directly because it's your source of inspiration and your resources. And what you cook out of it is your skills. Right? So I think people, I'm like you on that. I'm fascinated with ideas. I still think ideas are beautiful,
right?
But some ideas are self-referential. Right. Some ideas have potential to celebrate other things, and I'm more interested. Just like, I mean, if ideas are artists, right? They are the prima donnas, which we just admire how beautiful the voice is and how great it is, right? But there are also other kind of symphony and other music that allow more people to be involved with. Right. So I'm more interested in that now, even though when we are at a younger age, we are all fascinated by the hero genius, right? That one person, again, it stemmed from the Fountainhead. It stemmed from someone like Frank Lloyd Wright. It stemmed from someone that is so genius that he can draw the whole set of drawing for a building in 3 days, right? So with no feedback from clients, with no assistance from anyone. That was like I mean, it might be true, but at the same time, we like to kind of support that story because it gives us a reason. Oh, we're not that, so we don't have to do that, right? It becomes
somebody already did
else, and then but I think the damage is that it points to the fact that the greatness in architecture is always someone who can do by its own, which I call, it's kind of like a lone wolf in a bubble.
Yeah.
That image of an architect need to end.
Yeah.
Because we can do so much more profound impact to culture, to society, to civilization by collaborating, by leading, by including other people. And when you think about the master architects of the Renaissance or even of the Baroque, they were the master architect, but under them, the builders, the engineers, even the clients and the artisan, they're really the conductor, right? They conduct the whole symphony, and everyone come in, they have the vision. And in this case, maybe they're also the composer, they write a piece of music too, but they incorporate everyone into it. I think the modern division of labor make us into just like a little cake decorator that we just do all of these. And we sometimes don't also have an involvement in what the cake tastes like. Because the client give you the program, like, oh, we want this program. You just put into the most compact form and just wrap it, right? So that becomes the norm, and architects accept that role wholeheartedly. And we run as a beauty pageant, like, look, my form is so much sexier because I have window, it has cantilever, it has all of these, right? So we try to kind of be satisfied with this limited roles that was given to us by developers and by clients who are not enlightened. And I think we need to push back and say, no, we can do much better upstream. You know, if you can think about program together, if you can think about, you know, again, boundaries, how the boundary between community and building exists, how the boundary between public and private, the boundary of programming, how we can overlap some of that. And I love that notion because it allowed me to have more impact in general. Yeah. Might be like a challenge to you guys. I feel like there's definitely a thing called learning from Hawaii, right? Because it is unique enough of a place. You know, you have this mixed races, you know, American, Native, Japanese. It obviously is a place of tourism. It's a big part of the income come from that, but it just have such a deep connection to nature. And one of the few places left that still have that severity. So in that context, I feel like there are case studies or paradigm that we can learn from. Like because when people think about paradise, they think about Hawaii or they think about Tahiti or places that are, you know, have this rather disrupted beauty of nature, right? So how do we do that? I think that would give us a sign, especially now when people are not only they're redefining homes or work or public life, public spaces, they're also redefining goals in life, right? Is getting more money the best thing in life you can get? They start asking questions about commute, about why do I work in office building anymore? What do I want need out of life? You know, and I think Hawaii always be a place that people, because it's still part of America, but they also have a different way of life. It has a different time and different sense of place, and how it can bring that. Well, you could be a successful professional, a banker, an architect, a lawyer, but you still be in touch with who you are, you know, and be able to live the life you want to. As a good example, it doesn't have to be in the Hawaiian context all the time, but you can find your own way. And I think that balance is being searched again, right? Because we were in a little bit of a rat race, right? We all like, oh, let's go get more money, let's go get more award, let's get more recognition. But now I think the COVID and the social unrest, you know, strive for equality and justice is now redefining all of it. How can you have more impact socially? How can we lend a hand for people that need help? And what does it mean for me to live my life? You know, having $1 million more doesn't mean anything, right? Because unless if it's the only thing, right? So I think on that note, I feel like the idea of the overlapping boundaries, you know, the overlapping identities, how things come together, is more vibrant than others, because you know, as identity politics become stronger, you know, like the black, the white, the yellow, the browns, and all kind of colors that will continue to exist. You know, from now on, I mean, every colors is going to speak out. It's like, well, what about yellow? What about brown? What about red? So that will continue. There's no way to stop that, because that's what people will want to strive for. But as an undercurrent of unity, to talk about human in general, in context, you know, how we live our life, how we plan for our family, the quality we want to bring. You know, I think all of these have to do with how we have empathy for other people. And I think that, you know, in the Hawaiian context, I feel that, you know, nature is so much around you that it humbles you, just like when you're in at a mountain, it humbles you, but it also put you in a position that you kind of belong, which is, at the end of the day, we go back to nature again. So, you know, so how do we, you can kind of physically understand that concept, that not only that nature's there, you're part of it.